Welcome to Human-Focused Leadership. This was sort of a topic, really thinking about how we can be better leaders in thinking about our people first. It's something that both Céline and I have been talking about and doing, and it really is, I think, the forefront of what I do as a leader, as a CEO, and I think it's at the forefront of what Céline does as probably one of the best coaches that I know out there. So she's out there working with people constantly to sort of help them implement this into their organizations and into their teams. And when we came together, and we didn't have this term yet, but we had the idea, and it was Céline who came up with the wonderful title. So kudos to you. And that's why we're here today, to talk about how we can do more of this. And before we kind of get to some of that, I do want to thank People G2 for being our sponsor today. That's why it's free. That's why we get to put these on, and we don't have to charge anybody anything. So if you have anyone you would invite, it's not too late. You can invite them and they can pop in. Once you get the recording after the fact, if there's someone you think this might be helpful to, feel free to share it with them. This is all free content. We want leaders to be the best they can be. So even if they didn't attend live, you can send it off to them, and there'll be the PowerPoint as well included in there. As a thank you to anyone who's attending, if you'd like to check out my leadership course, which is on my website, chrisdyer.com, there is a 50% off coupon which you can take advantage of. And don't forget to check out the 2 books that I've written. The most recent one, Remote Work, with my co-author, Kim Shepard, who I know is here today. Hey, Kim. And that's out on Amazon or wherever you buy books. So feel free to check that out. But let's get to the real heart of the matter, human-focused leadership. And as I mentioned, my good friend Céline is going to start us off and really help us frame what we mean by this and where we can really think about putting this. And then later on, we'll kind of let you guys answer any questions, or ask any questions that you may have. And then I'm going to really dive into what are some of the practical things that I do, that we do in my organizations, that we are real tactical, practical things that you might be able to take back to your organizations or think about doing. So, and then we'll again let you ask any questions, and then hopefully roll out of here right on time. So, Céline, I'm going to turn it over to you. If I've missed anything, feel free to go. And if you just say the word next, I'm happy to go to the next slide whenever you need it.
I appreciate that. And I don't think you've missed anything. So I'm going to dive right in. I want to make this as valuable for everyone here as possible and leave as much space for questions. So I'm not going to start by telling you anything about myself. You can find that out on LinkedIn if you're really that curious. Let's dive into the topic, because I don't want to spend 10 minutes talking about myself. So let's go to the next slide. And what I'm going to talk about, I said we, because we as a group, but what I'm going to cover in the first part of this before we jump into some real life examples from Chris, which is I'm really excited about, is I'm going to kind of define what human-focused leadership is and why we should care about it. We're going to talk about what it looks like in action. I'm actually going to tell you the 4 keystone habits that I have seen with the leaders that I've worked with that I think are absolutely imperative for human-focused leaders, and how you can put them into practice today, so you can be aware of that aspect very specifically at the end of this. So next slide, please. We can go to the next one. It's placeholder slide. There we go. So in the easiest way of summing up human-focused leadership, and it's not enough, but the easiest way is to say that it is really a practice of prioritizing people and culture. And I want to be really clear that this doesn't mean it's about people pleasing, which is something that I've heard from leaders when I've talked about this, that it sounds like people pleasing and it sounds like you're talking about feelings a lot. It's absolutely not about that. It does center compassion and understanding, which is the ability to be sensitive to the challenges people are facing, to respond with empathy. Empathy is important, and to take action to support and develop them. But it is not a practice of, nonstop talking about feelings or people pleasing. And I want to get that out of the way right up front, because that's often the resistance that I have heard, and I'm sure Chris has heard and other people have heard when you talk about this type of leadership. This really is about empowering everyone around them, which is why human-focused leaders are very mindful of the impact that their leadership has on the people around them. And that's really important because we talk a lot about the importance of intention, and it matters. But a human-focused leader is more focused on, let me say focused a few more times, and mindful of the impact than the intention, because intention can get lost because everyone has different stories and they know that. So they're very engaged, mindful of, want to understand their impact as a leader. It's really about bringing humanity into the center of how we engage with, lead, and develop the people around us. So human-focused leadership is what the culture piece of this, and I know Chris is going to get into culture in a lot more depth, so I'm going to touch on this really quickly, and then he will talk about this more in his part of this webinar. But it's really about fostering a culture where people feel valued, involved in decisions, like they have a voice, they're supported to achieve their full potential, they're seen as and encouraged to show up as whole human beings. That will come up multiple times in this. It empowers them to bring any and all parts of themselves to work and encourages that culture of discussion, innovation, connection, where value and trust are sort of at the core of that. So it's really about, to the last point on this slide, bringing out the best in people, not what Chris thinks is the best of a person, not what I think is the best of the person, but what they think is their best, and really letting them step into what that looks like.
And Céline, it might be helpful for people to understand, when I started my company, People G2, back in 2001, all the way up till 2009, I would say I've spent almost all of my focus on the P&L, our products and services, our vendors. I was thinking about all the things that we could do better to make us a better company, but I spent very little time thinking about how to make work better for my people, how to clear obstacles for them, how to make sure they felt like they could be heard, or they could contribute, or they could be, skilled up or trained. And then in 2009, did the opposite, right? I flipped it on its head. And that is all I do now, is think about them and how I can help them, or put things in place that will help them, right? And then they take care of all those other things I used to worry about, right? And that's the switch here. Yeah. And maybe I want to make sure people get that, right? So if you're worried about your people are great. You hired them. They're the experts at, all these different things that they do. But if you spend all of your time kind of doing their job for them all the time, that's different than how do I help you excel and be great so you can do this great job and I'm not having to do it. Hopefully that context helps as well.
Yeah. And you, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to get into this a little bit, right? So I really appreciate you just pitched the ball directly at me. So I appreciate that. Thanks, Chris. But the core of what you've said is really important, which is that we are traditional modes of business. I mean, traditional air quotes, modes of business often really focus on putting profit first. They put product first. We talk about, customer centric. Customers matter. Please don't get me wrong. All these things matter, but none of them matter if your people aren't taken care of, because the people are not the means to the end. Your people are actually the thing that drives all of this to make it possible. And so when you focus them at the center of what you're doing, when you make it human-centered, you end up with more profitability. You end up with better products. You end up with all those things that we think we should focus on because that's what we're taught as the primary driver, and they're not actually the primary driver. So that traditional model tends to be very data centric, right? So it's relying on hard facts. It's why we like profits and products and the things that we can measure, because the thought process behind it is that if you can measure it, you can manage it. So we want to figure out what we can measure, and then we want to manage that stuff, including people, except we can't really measure people that well. And what happens when we focus on measuring and managing those things is that it can lack focus and prioritization. It can often result in competing priorities because we're finding new things to measure and then new things to manage. And there's a lack of clarity for the people that are being led. It's really a system that's designed to minimize risk and optimize efficiency. And let's air quote that: minimize risk and optimize efficiency. But then what it signals to people is that they can't be trusted. It limits their ownership. It limits their initiative. When you are human focused and you're leading with vision, which, listen, I recognize there's a lot of rhetoric out there about the importance of leading with vision, but it really does matter, because if you most companies don't actually do this, but if you have a vision and purpose that you are setting priorities and expectations from, people are engaged in the process. There is still data that is being used. It's data informed. It's not data centric. Data matters, but it can't be the center of everything, right? Data-driven leaders often miss that vision piece. They get so hung up on the data, the very traditional way of doing things, and they lose that the people are really what is going to roll and move everything forward. So thank you, Chris, for setting that up. It's the perfect way to move into this piece. There we go. So audience question, if anyone wants to hop in the chat right now, based on what you've heard so far, what challenges do you think people might face when shifting into human-focused leadership, when shifting from that data-centric mindset and way of being into that really human-focused way of being? Give everyone a second to answer if anyone wants to pipe in.
And I can steal some coffee while they're doing that.
Yeah, see, it works out really well.
Being kind, yeah. It's a good
Absolutely.
one.
And I would build on that to say that I think that that's a really good point, Wynn. And I think a lot of times we have language around treat people the way you want to be treated, and we think that that is kindness. And in truth, kindness is treating people the way they want to be treated.
Yeah.
Not the way you want to be treated. Demonstrating empathy, for sure. How to see the return on the investment. Yeah, leadership wouldn't want to spend too much money. Absolutely. That's that data-driven focus, right? ROI, 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 as opposed to seeing that the human piece is what drives that return ultimately.
Looks like Joe said, how do you establish trust? And I'm going to actually get into that a little bit later. So we might just put a little pin on that one, because I'm going to give you some very concrete things you can do. But I would certainly probably guess that Céline will say, actually do the things as a leader that you tell people you want them to do, right? Like leading by example.
100%. And that's the biggest disconnect that we see, is that I talk a lot about the aspirational values or the aspirational culture, the aspirational way of being, that when leaders aren't actually showing up that way, you're breaking trust, because you're saying, here's what we want, but you're not doing it.
Right.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for all the answers and participation. It's great. Yeah. Getting buy-in, psychological safety, toxic leadership. Yeah. And yes, servant leadership is definitely in line with this, Mark, 100%. Let's go on to the characteristics of human-focused leaders. So these are the ones that I have observed and I will make this note that the work that I do is very focused on human-focused leaders and organizations. So these are the characteristics that I see consistently, and that there's some research that aligns with this. There's information out there. It's not only me, but these are the ones I have pulled out, what I see consistently as the characteristics of the best, most successful human-focused leaders. And I want to touch on each of them because I think it's really helpful to have some specific language around this. So self-awareness is probably the number one piece that I would put here. I know it's on every list. Let's just acknowledge that it cannot be overemphasized. And the truth is that any leader who thinks they know themselves really well and they are really self-aware is probably missing some things quite dramatically, because the most self-aware people I know are the ones who are like, there's so much more to learn about myself. I'm constantly changing and learning new things and in new situations I wasn't expecting. Those are the most self-aware people, because they are the ones who are, to go back to what I said earlier, they're really concerned with the impact they have on people. They have a deep understanding that their own beliefs and assumptions, what those beliefs and assumptions about the world are, about how things work, where they're showing up, they're constantly exploring them. They're mindful of personal purpose. They have the ability, there's a great sense of humility in how they show up. So they have the ability to appreciate the strengths and contribution and gifts of other people while still being open to feedback and ideas about their own performance. And that balance really comes from deep work on self-awareness. Another very important characteristic and is inclusivity. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about really empowering and enabling the whole human to show up, right? So it is overcoming, it's moving past that need for comfort and familiarity, because let's be honest for a second. It is a lot easier to have conversations with, it's much more comfortable to have conversations with people we know, with ideas that we're already familiar with, that are going to confirm what we're thinking, not challenge it. And human focused leaders are inclusive and do not put their comfort over the benefit of change or diversity of thought or new perspectives or whatever the case may be. They're really proactively seeking different opinions, different people around them, different ways of thinking, different education, whatever the case may be. There is that balance of learning is important, but also unlearning is important. And that's really, foundational to that idea of inclusivity. They have a really clear sense of purpose, right? So they often can very clearly articulate their values, what their quote North Star is, where they're headed, why it matters. Regardless of what's changing around them, they have that centeredness and purpose that they can lean on. And they share that very openly. Truthfully, the best leaders that I know will talk about their values and why they're making decisions or why they're showing up in certain ways in alignment with those things. And there's no distance or difference between that. They're very curious. So they're willing to challenge ideas. They're willing to challenge the status quo. They're willing to explore, to discover, not only about themselves, but about others, about the world, about the industry, whatever the case may be. There's that really deep sense of curiosity that it doesn't have to, things might be great, but there could be another better way. There could be another more interesting perspective. Let me go see if I can find that. They're deeply positive. And I want to be really clear that this is not toxic positivity. This is, yes, we can accept the reality of the situation we are in while still seeing the bright side of things and still seeing the possibility in things, and still understanding that that what is happening right now, regardless of how tough it could be, is not the be all end all of everything. So they're also compassionate. This goes back to also what I said earlier. I defined it then, but it's really that introspection to put yourself in the shoes of someone else, being aware when empathy is taken to the extremes, being as understanding as possible is very core to how they're showing up. And they have a strong presence. So this is not, and I want to say this right now, it's not cockiness. It's not being the biggest personality in the room. It's really that balance of charisma, confidence, gravitas, decisiveness, all of this in alignment together, and also knowing that it's okay to be silent. And it's not about being the loudest voice in the room, but just really owning their presence in a space. Next, there we go. So when you see this list of words, what do you see your strengths being as a human focused leader? Is there anything on here where you're like, oh yeah, I do that really well? I think that I have a natural foundation in that piece. This is not a trick question. If you say self-awareness, it's okay.
I was going to say the super self-aware leader would never admit any of them. Right. That's some good. I always feel like positivity. I like to focus on what's working first. My good friend Tenny Poole, who's on this webinar, taught me that. The wording to that and being curious, right? Like, hey, let's try something new. Like I love doing that.
Yeah,
that's fun.
Absolutely.
Some really good ones here.
I love how much compassion is in this group. I think that's really wonderful to hear. Welcoming of diverse opinions. Yeah.
Which is not always easy to do, because sometimes diverse opinions can directly conflict with your view of the world, can even really run up against your values, right? And so it's hard. That's a hard thing to consistently do. So well done to anyone who feels like that's a strength for them. It's well done.
It's uncomfortable, right? We don't like to be uncomfortable, and it is uncomfortable to have diverse opinions around you.
Yeah.
Yep. These are great. Thanks for participating. So we're going to talk about a little bit about the future of leadership. So why this matters right now. And I'm going to own my bias. I have thought this has mattered for a very long time. And I've been talking about this for far longer than I would like to admit. But I think right now we're really seeing some of the reasons it matters more than ever. And one of the key pieces of that is that we have now been forced into, whether people have liked it or not, or were resisting or not, much of the world has been forced into working differently because of 2020. And we are now looking at hybrid ways of working. And in hybrid ways of working, when it's not everyone in the office at the same time, or it's not everyone remote, or it's not everyone able to be in one place on the same time zone, whatever the case may be, empathy and compassion and allowing people to show up as their whole self matters more than ever. I was going to say, Chris, I don't know what just happened, but it went away. We're back. It matters more than ever because you don't know people's situations at work, at home, what they're dealing with, and hybrid ways of working are allowing all of those things to be at the forefront of the workplace and of the connection points in the workplace. So leading with these characteristics, leading in this way, is a game changer for the future of work, which is going to become more hybrid, not less. It's not going to be, we're not going back to the way things were. For anyone who thinks that's not real. It's going to continue to change. And human-focused leaders are primed for any of the changes that are coming because they are focused on the people and not on the specific way of doing things or the specific product or the specific whatever. When you're focused on the people, you are much more flexible for the change, for any change that comes. Expectations of work are changing. I don't think this is mind-blowing to anyone, but human-focused leadership really allows for whatever the future expectations are and what they're going to look like to be centered in the workplace, right? So at one point, we had a very clear expectation that work starts at this time and ends at this time, and it looks this way and it shows up this way. And between all of that going out the window and people wanting to work and should be able to work in ways that align with their cycles and where they want to work, with the additions of technology, with the expectations about availability, many different things, human-focused leadership, because it is focused on the human and what is best for them to be their best self, it can flex into whatever those expectations become. Workforce is becoming more diverse. We know that, statistically, and I'm going to talk about millennials for a second specifically, but this is going to be even more so with any future generation that steps into the workplace. It is the millennials are the most diverse generation in terms of, it doesn't make a difference, religion, ethnicity, belief system, education, whatever it is, they are the most diverse generation we've ever seen in the workforce. And it is going to become more diverse, not less diverse. So the more we can allow and be comfortable with, the more we can be comfortable with and embrace diversity of thought, diversity of ways of being, of showing up, whatever the case may be, the better leader we are going to become. And that is going to become imperative for leaders as they move forward. And then the last piece on this, I will say, is that there's no such thing as work-life balance. That's not a real thing. It's let's toss that idea out the window and talk about work-life harmony. And again, allowing people to have the grace and space to figure out what's going to work best for them to be their best self. A human-focused leader is able to do that and step into that in a meaningful way and not revert back to, well, this is the idea of what it should be, or this is what I was told, or this is the way we did it in the past, because it's about the person.
It's so good to hear you say that, because a lot of the people whose names I recognize on the webinar today, I know pre-COVID were on planes all the time. They were already doing the quote unquote hybrid or flex work, right? They were in different offices, working all over the place. And I'll bet you they had no balance and no harmony at all. And now that everybody else has been given this opportunity to work in this more flexible way, maybe us as leaders could be a little bit more balanced, to have a little bit more harmony, to think about how do we create, some more signposts, some more start and stop times that make a bit more healthy sense, right?
Yeah. And it's about figuring out what works for them, right? What works for you. That's the whole point of work-life harmony. And that's the whole point of this type of leadership is it's not trying to find a balance or putting the arbitrary rules on. It's finding what works for you and being able to say no and not being on planes or traveling or whatever the case may be if it's not the thing that supports you and your lifestyle the best. Claire, I appreciate that note. The balance sounds like a never-ending challenge and harmony sounds pleasant. Doesn't it sound nice? Harmony? I agree. So what is one habit? This is not, I'm going to say that I don't think that is necessarily in the right place, but that's okay. Okay, I'm going to pause that question because the next slide is about habits. So let's get into the habits and I will ask that question at that point in time. Apologies for that. So I said I was going to give you 4 keystone habits. We're going to go through them really quickly, but here are the 4. These are the habits that I see human-focused leaders being intentional about. I want to make that really clear. These are intentional habits that they have, and there's lots of different ways that they show up. An intentional practice of self-awareness. There's so many ways this can show up, but at the core of it, it's about setting aside your mental map or your judgment, values, beliefs, assumptions, whatever. Self-reflection can be journaling. It can be having a coach. It can be having a therapist. It can be having a group of CEOs or executives or whoever that they're talking to where they're creating that space, but it is intentionally practicing self-awareness, not having it be something that once in a while you go, that's interesting. I'm going to make a note of that for myself, right? It's that intentional practice of self-awareness. Seeking diversity in all ways. So this is really at its core, people or human-focused leaders, they relish being challenged and they seek out challenge. And that for some leaders can be as simple as in a meeting, especially if you're someone who is very emphatic and convincing when they speak. It is at the end of pitching an idea or saying something, asking the question, what am I missing? Tell me what I'm not seeing. Tell me, push back, question this. They're really encouraging, constantly being challenged. They're not looking for someone to confirm their ideas. They want to be challenged. I always joke that the thing that people hear me say more than ever is, I am not married to my own ideas. Please push back on anything that I say. I'm not looking for confirmation ever. They're encouraging experimentation on failure if you lead a team. It's the idea of, I like the idea of, quote, idea tries, right? Where you're consistently trying ideas. You're encouraging ideas from around the company. There's no correlation between a person's place in the organization and the quality of ideas. Let's never forget that. So we're encouraging people to give ideas, to experiment in reasonable ways. Obviously, there's risk to be managed. I recognize that. But experiment in very specific ways. And then we are actively talking about failure. We are not ignoring it. The leaders that I know who are doing this, they have debriefs, they have postmortems, they celebrate failure. It's part of meetings. One of the things that they'll do is say, okay, everyone start by telling me one thing that you failed at this week. And it's not a stigma. It's not looked down upon. It is, who has the biggest fail? And we're going to celebrate that because this tells us that we're not stuck and we're moving forward. And then the last thing that I'll say is the idea of expressing gratitude and appreciation, whether this is gratitude in meetings, whether this is a gratitude journal. This shows up very differently for different people, but it is not overlooking the importance of appreciation, saying thank you to people around you, to yourself, to the day, whatever the case may be, and acknowledging people for the great work that they're doing. So they're not just criticizing, they're not just focused on shortcomings, they really are focused on appreciating what is there. And that's where I would ask, what habit are you committed to going forward? And then also any additional questions at this point.
I looked at, there was a question for you, Céline. Do you think the lack of face-to-face interactions is a challenge for human-centric leadership?
I think that it can be if people are not using technology effectively. And I know, Chris, you're going to talk about this a little bit, I'm sure, in your part. It can be a challenge. It doesn't have to be a challenge is what my answer to that would be. We do know that from all the studies that have been done that in-person interactions do light up our brains differently in different parts of our brains, different connection points than virtual interactions, whether it's, voice or video. So there are different challenges, but you can absolutely, there's fantastic technology that minimizes those challenges. And if you are showing up with that person consistently in consistent ways, you're creating trust, you're being vulnerable, you're enabling them to be the same way and embracing them as a whole person, those challenges are minimal regardless of the venue that you're leading.
And as someone who's been leading remote organizations, I mean, one of which since 2009, we have way more human-centric leadership, way more of this in our organization now being 100% remote than we ever did when we were in the same office. However, we had to totally rework how we do things, how we meet. So if we kept doing it the way we were doing it before, we would have lost a lot of that. But instead, we had to change our meetings, we had to change our cadence, change what was important. We had to, not everything had to be a video call. Not everything has to be a phone call. We had to really think about what worked best for us. And that then over time increased our ability to really be there for our people. So, yeah.
I love that you said that, because it's really what I hear immediately is it's being intentional about making it work for the way that you work. Right. So not just assuming that the number of meetings or whatever it was when it was face-to-face is going to be the same as when it's remote or virtual, but it's saying, how do we be intentional about adapting this for the situation we're in and the people we're with?
Right. Well, you all can continue to ask us questions, and I'm going to go ahead and roll into my part here. And one of my favorite sayings that my co-author always reminds me of, which is, if you want to focus on people, then that must include us as well, right? So we can think about people, and we can think about how we want them to act and to work. But if we don't think about ourselves as leaders, and we don't put things in place and then actually practice those things, and we actually do them, then we can't ask people to do as we do, right? Or we can't be upset if they're doing what we do because we're doing the wrong thing, or we're not taking care of ourselves, or we're not being good examples inside the organization. And really the single thing that happened to me recently, I sort of reminded my organization about this, and I went, this feels like a webinar, and this is how Céline and I kind of started this off. And I want to give you all, Kim's telling me another good one. We're getting to that one, Kim. Don't worry, it's coming. She's already getting me going. So what is the most stressful and amazing thing to do at work? And I will tell you, it's taking a vacation. This is my wife and I just recently in Zadar, Croatia. Funny side note, Céline and I have actually been to that city as well together for a conference. But there we are, kind of hanging out by the Sea Organ, listening to the beautiful sounds that the ocean makes into this art installation. And it was amazing. But it only was amazing because I had a very intentional way that we deal with vacations at our organization. And so what we do is we had to figure out how to help people fix their lack of desire to want to take a vacation, or all the anxiety that they had when they returned from vacation. So many years ago, I realized that people were not taking their vacation days. We were paying them out for vacation here in the States because that's what you're supposed to do, but they weren't actually using them to go somewhere and unwind and disconnect. And when we really went back and talked to people and found out why, it was, one, they were too afraid they were going to miss out on all these important things going on. Number two, they felt like it was way too much work for them when they returned from vacation, that it was almost not worth it to be gone for 5 days or 10 days to take a real vacation. It was too much work for them. And so I went back with my senior team and said, how can we fix this? What can we do? And what we came up with was this very simple, although kind of scary thing that we do, which is we ask everyone who takes at least, 5 days or more. If you're only gone for a few days, we don't do this, but 5 days or more, you need to put an out of office greeting that says, I'm out of the office. I have already deleted this email. I will not read it. If you really need me to see this email, resend it on this date when I'm back in the office. And here are all the people in the organization you can reach out to if you need help, right? If you can't wait, if you need help right now, here's who you contact. And then, so that's nice. We tell them they're going to delete their email, but to make sure they really delete their emails, day one back from vacation, they have a meeting. We call this an ostrich meeting, which is help me get my head out of the sand. Help me know what's going on. Teach me about what I've missed. They have an ostrich meeting with their team, and their team tells them, hey, this is what's been going on. Here's the big things you missed. Here's what you might want to, find out about. And then they share their screen and they go in and they select all of their emails and delete them. And they start at inbox 0 when they return from vacation. That was how we solved our problem of people not taking vacations, of people feeling all this anxiety and worry and frustration when they return. I returned to 9,000 emails personally after being gone for 2 weeks, just over 2 weeks. And I went in, I videoed myself deleting them all, and then sent the video to everyone in my company to remind them that it's important that you take vacation. It's important that you don't come back to all these emails and feel frustrated. And the reason we do it that way is that if they did happen to need to find out about one particular thing that did happen with a client, they could go back in their deleted emails and they could find that email and they could get caught up, right? So if there was a particular issue, we have had to be a little bit flexible with this with our salespeople. Like they have a huge deal that's going to land on a Tuesday and they're on vacation and they want to be involved. Okay, we've allowed them to okay, you can be on this one call. We don't want you to miss out on all this money that you've been working really hard, to do. So there has been little caveats to help this work well. But for the most part, when we started doing this, people started telling me how much lower their anxiety levels were, how much better they felt after vacation. And we've solved the issue in looking at the data. People are taking their vacations now, which as a leader, I want people to do because they always come back as better employees. They have amazing ideas, right? They kind of lose that little chip in the orneriness of the grind you get on working every single day dealing with things. So the next one is really to focus on your culture. And Céline talked about culture on a higher level, and I want to make sure we really define what culture is. So to me, I define company culture is the combination of the easily seen ideas like vision statements and values and the things you put up on the wall, right, that everyone's supposed to know, but it's really combined with the harder to see norms, right, the behaviors, the languages, the beliefs, and the systems inside the organization. So how do we meet? If I need to find out if I need to get my computer fixed, do I go through 19 levels of bureaucracy, or am I allowed to directly contact the CTO to get that fixed? That answer is different in every organization. That's a norm, right? That's a system. And so what you figuring out how to get things done in the organization is culture. How you meet is culture. How your company reacts to mistakes, how it reacts to good things happening or bad things happening, that's culture. And so you really need to make sure that things are intentional. And that if you're unhappy with your culture, is it that people don't understand your vision and your values? Or is it that the norms and behaviors and those things are a little messed up? And that's where you need to focus some of your attention. So if we think about systems, and I'm a big believer that a system, a good system, can fix just about anything. Maybe not everything, but just about anything. And I think that bad systems are to blame for most of the things that we complain about right now. You look at many of the things happening with police brutality and racism. I mean, there's a lot of that is a bad system. Things have been designed poorly that reinforces and creates and has a lot of these bad outcomes that we don't want to have. And the reason we can't just flip a switch and fix it all is because it's really hard to change a system. It's the same thing in our organization. So we really want to make sure that we understand, how does work get done? And then begin to play around and change and manipulate that if that's not how you really want it to be. How we get work done, is this async? Is this all at the same time? Are we all on the same time? And then we want to practice this as well. So I'm often wonder why, as children, many of us were in sports. And if you remember back, we probably spent 99% of our time practicing the sport and only 1% of the time actually competing in a real game or a match or an event. And yet at work, it's the complete opposite. We don't practice anything, right? And we're just expected to perform at match level, right? At competitive level all the time. So I suggest that you go back to your team and practice sometimes how we want to interact with each other. Now, we use a thing called a tsunami planning meeting, which is a 30-minute meeting where we give everyone a fake prompt. What would happen if the team leader left? We doubled in business. We lost half our business. We come up with the crazy prompt and let people practice discussing and arguing and having good feedback with each other on a fake topic. And then if you see that people are struggling, are talking too much, not talking enough, not being heard, then you can go back and work with them on what you think they should do better the next time you have one of these or when it's a real situation. So you can't get better at something if we don't practice it. I can say I want to be the best guitar player in the world, but if I just have the guitar sitting in the corner, I never pick it up, it's not going to happen. So we can't expect people to be better at their jobs, better leaders, if we don't practice some of these behaviors with them and help them understand what's important. Make sure we understand how to measure success. And this is hard, right? This is not like just some easy thing you do on 1 hour on a Friday. Okay, talking about with your teams and your people, what does success look like? What does that mean? And how will we measure it so we know it was actually achieved? It should be a part of our dialogue all of the time. Make sure that we have a good set of language to use and we understand how to use that to get out healthy conflict, right? We want to be able to have a good discussion. Céline mentioned earlier that a great leader will say, tell me where I got this wrong. Show me where I didn't understand this. Where am I? What I always say, help me poke holes in this boat, right? Help me think about how we might do this differently. But the language you have to use as a leader is very intentional, right? If you say, well, this seems like the best way to do it, right? Or you guys all agree with this, but you can tell me if you disagree. I mean, if you use certain language or sort of telling people, no, I want you to agree with me. I want you to go along with this. What you need to say is very differently is, I may have gotten this all wrong. This is what I know so far. Maybe I got this all wrong. Tell me where I did. Tell me where this needs to change. Maybe how else could we do this? What else would we do? If I'm wrong, what else might we do for this situation? Your language is very, very important if you want to incite healthy conflict. And again, practicing that in a fake scenario, I think, is the best way to get people comfortable with that. I had DJ Edson on my radio show recently, and he talked about how in his organization, he works with like professional football players and athletes to help them design these really important leadership models. And he talks about how they don't ever use the word busy. They use the word active. And that's a really important distinction for them. I didn't really understand why that was important, busy, active, whatever, but for them, that's really important. For me, what's important is I want to talk about what's working versus what is the problem. I want to talk about how we can improve something versus, well, let's talk about why that's a problem and who's the problem, where's the problem. I want to talk about how we make a situation better. How do we improve and what's working? So be really intentional about what you think is important to help people understand where they should be focusing their intentional language, their intentional conflict, their intentional disagreement. And then make sure you are defining your meeting types. If you try to go back and have the same type of meeting for every interaction in your organization, you are going to fail. In an office where we're all in the same place with a bunch of cubicles, we may have a conference room meeting, but we're also having hallway meetings next to with our cubicle mate, lunch meetings. We're finding little ways to have different types of meetings that give us different outcomes. We also can see that people maybe had a meeting and we know it's our turn to go have a meeting with that person. In remote and hybrid and flex work, we need to tell people, if you need to have a quick meeting, here's what we call it. We call it a cockroach meeting in my company, 15-minute meeting. It's a quick little one agenda item thing. right? We call our big meetings Tiger Team meetings. So people know this is a big meeting. It's a big deal. So if you can define different types of meetings for your organization and help your people understand what those are, what the length is, what the intentionality is, what's going to happen. Do they show up and listen? Do they show up and talk? Do they show up and disagree? Do they show up and strategize? That's how we help people be more effective in this sort of uncertain times with work being very, very variable right now, especially variable in where they're going to make it happen. So quick question. When we talk about communication, what do you think are the 3 most important things to keep in mind about communication if you want to be an effective leader, if you want to be a human-focused leader that's, kicking ass and getting it done? What do you think those things are? And you don't have to maybe give me 3. If you only got 1 or you got 2, throw them in the chat. I would love to know what you think some of the important things are around communication. And while they're going, Céline, do you have any that you can think of?
For communication specifically?
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things about communication is to check assumptions and understanding. I think I am always on a soapbox about checking assumptions and understanding because we all have stories and it colors things.
Yeah, there's some great ones coming in. Communication's a two-way street. Listening more than you talk. Consistency and frequency. Speaking up if you don't understand. These are wonderful. Thank you all so much for giving us these wonderful suggestions. And Céline, you have now repaid me because you have actually teed me up for the very first thing, which is awesome. I have talked about this on many webinars before, but it is your fundamental, whether you're a leader or not, it is your fundamental responsibility to understand intent. So if you're having a conversation with someone and they tell you something, I think the mistake is we think it is the other person's job to make sure we understand what they meant. And it's not. It's our job to understand what they meant. And that may be like you're going, wait, what? But we are listening with our own biases, our own filters. Other people may be upset, they may be agitated, they may be excited, or maybe happy, and they're not delivering to you the message that they're intending to deliver. So it is our job in any conversation or setting to check our understanding, right? I think what you're telling me is you're upset about this, this, and this. And inevitably someone will say, well, no, that's not exactly what I'm saying. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how were they not saying that? Okay, well, tell me what you really meant. And then they go a little deeper and a little deeper. And I come to find out that they were just really bad at communicating what they meant. Or sometimes I had my own bias. I had my own crap in the way that wasn't helping me really understand what they meant. So if you want to be a human-focused leader, you better make sure that you take on the responsibility of understanding the intent of what your people are saying, that you really dig down before you move on and understand what they've said. I love to use this thing called a 3+. I learned this in a negotiation course, but I use it more for communication than anything else with my people. So you want to say things that are important 3 times or more. Maybe in 3 different ways or in 3 different contexts. Maybe you say it in Slack. Maybe you say it in a team meeting. Maybe you send an email later on. You have to repeat key information because not everybody hears everything or remembers everything that was said. It's also a wonderful technique for the first point. If you want to really understand what someone is saying, repeat it back to them 3 times. And if they agree with you 3 times, then you probably have it right. So if Céline called me and she seemed really upset, I would say, geez, Céline, it seems like you're really upset at me right now. Well, no, I'm not upset at you. I'm upset at your employee who did this thing. Oh, so you're upset about what my employee... Well, I'm not really upset at them. I'm upset at what they said to my client. Oh, and so you start like getting down to the layers and it's like, okay, what you're upset about was this email that was sent and what the wording in it. Yes. Okay. Originally, I thought she was just mad at me, right? And so by asking these this questions and keep going down and try to get agreements 3 times, you really can ensure that you understand. This takes discipline. It's kind of mind-numbing sometimes. Sometimes I don't want to do it because I'm just like, oh, I want to just go with the easy thing, what I think is meant. But it always, I get so much out of it. And I feel like I really help the other person feel heard, right? and it really helps me connect with them and have better communication with them in the future. There's some other great statements. Thank you so much. Steve asked a wonderful question. Will this recording be available? Yes, we will send it to everyone who registered, whether you're here live or not. So don't worry, along with the deck. So make sure we are really ensuring we have great understanding. That is, for me, if you can do nothing else, if you ignored everything else we said, if you can just ensure understanding, you will up your game quite a bit. So ask for summaries, ask for recaps, repeat back. So the first part I talked about having a conversation, right? But there are also contexts where you show up to a meeting as a leader and you are basically in webinar mode. You're not really having a discussion. You're like, hey, I need to fill you guys in on this thing that happened. And you're going to talk for 20 minutes because that's what you got to do. That's a wonderful time to say, okay, I'm going to stop now and say, what did you all hear? Can you tell me what you heard? Can you repeat back to me? Can you give me a recap of what you think I said? If you're not careful, this can sound condescending. So you're going to be a little careful. Because say, I want to make sure that you heard that I delivered to you what I was supposed to, right? So be really kind of put a little bit of nurture around this. But I have had people repeat back to me and I go, that's not what I said at all. Or that's not what I meant to say. And I go, okay, great. I'm glad you heard that. But I also need you to make sure you heard A, B, and C. And they go, oh, okay. Not everyone hears the same thing. So you can change your filter about what you hear. And you can also make sure that you help other people hear you properly by asking them to summarize, recap, repeat, whatever was said. So it's a two-part. Go ahead, Céline.
I love that. I just want to say a really key place that this comes into play as leaders is around expectations specifically, is really having people recap, repeat, summarize the expectations that they're hearing inside of what was said. Because there's so much miscommunication in that space. And then people don't feel heard. They feel like they went on a wild goose chase. They feel like whatever the case may be. And so I love that. And I would just say, yes. And let's make sure we're really doing this around expectations, especially to what you're saying. If you're going in and you're sharing, here's where all this information is, here's where my head's at. Make sure if there's any expectations at the end of it, everyone is really clear on what that looks like.
And that extra work you do that feels like 5 minutes you don't have to spare right now, I swear saves you hours later, hours of conflict and re-meeting and all this other stuff. So slow down and get this right up front. It will save you so much time later on. Another question. What is a tough situation that you have faced where you felt you didn't show up as your best self? Because I think it's really important for human-focused leaders to really strategize their shortcomings. We are all not good at everything. I will raise my hand and say, my name is Chris, and I'm not good at everything. And I know this. And so I have to really strategize how I avoid doing things I know that are not my strengths. So where are some areas that maybe you feel like you don't show up as your best self? If you're willing to share that, we'd love to see you throw it in the comments and hear some of those. I know for me, like if I'm under pressure and there's a lot going on or something bad has happened and it's like, threat level midnight has occurred, I can get very task oriented instead of being strategic, which is what I need to do. That's where I'm strong, is to be strategic, but I can get very task oriented and let's just do a bunch of little tasks so I feel better like I've done something. And so I have to avoid that, right? Mm-hmm. And so there are lots of different ways that we can do this. So make sure you understand that when things get tough, you know who you are under stress. Again, I know under stress, I can get very task oriented. And so know who you are. Do you get mad? Do you get loud? Right? Do you turn into a bully? Do you get quiet? Do you maybe you don't say anything when things get tough and your team really needs you to, right? Maybe you kind of crawl under the table and kind of wait for things to calm down. So really knowing who you are. It's great to know who you are when things are great, but you got to know who you are when things are tough. And what can you do to cope with any of your bad habits, right? Maybe it's just remembering them. Maybe it's knowing them. I can get loud. I can, again, get task oriented. I know what I need to do, right? I also can be overly calm, and that can infuriate my team because I'm like way too calm, and they're like, but this is a big deal. Why are you so calm? It's infuriating. And so sometimes I need to like show them that I do really care about this, that I do take this seriously. They can take my calmness as lack of understanding, a lack of caring about the issue, and that's not it at all. I'm trying to be calm because I'm trying to be a calm leader in this important situation, but they need me to be to kind of stand up and show a little bit of my emotions as well, right? So I've had that feedback with them. I've had those conversations, and I kind of know that. Where can you do more around your strengths? So when things do get tough, reminding yourself, okay, I know I'm good at these things. These are the things I need to focus on. This is where I can be good. This is where I can be helpful, right? And avoiding those other things. I used to kind of have this list of like my strengths and my weaknesses. And when things got tough, I would look at it and try to remember to focus on the strengths and not to do the things I knew I was weak at. And then I don't have to look at the list anymore. I remember them now. I've looked at it enough that I remember, right? And then where can we do less around weaknesses? I actually have someone on my team whose job it is, if things are bad, if they see me to start taking over tasks, they send me a Slack message and say, you told me to remind you when you do this. So I have a buddy who reminds me, and I empowered them to do that, to remind me not to ever do that, right? And they'll send me a private Slack message so I don't feel embarrassed in front of the team or whatever. They send me a private message and like, oh yeah, they're right, right? So I've built in some mechanisms as well. All right, those are the things that Céline and I wanted to present to all of you today as incredible human-focused leaders. I would love any questions that you have about any of the content that Céline and I delivered today, or maybe there was something we didn't hit, maybe it was something we didn't talk about that you were hoping we would. Please throw them in into the chat. There's some great comments in there. Thank you so much, Kim and Roberto. I think Roberto's calling in from Chile. So we have a wonderful international audience today. Thank you, Mark, for your thank you. Kim said, know your strengths of everyone on your team. Chances are that your strengths are their weaknesses and vice versa. And that's wonderful. Yeah, if you know someone else is really good at something, let them do it, right? And you can take on something else. So, Céline, anything else to add?
Listen, I want to add something to what you said when you were talking about knowing your strengths and weaknesses and building on what Kim said, because I think this is something that is very interesting to observe. And that is often that our strengths and weaknesses are actually shadows, like the weaknesses, the shadow side of our strengths. So if we are really good at strategy, to what your example was, you will lean into the tasks because it feels like the thing that's going to move the thing you're really good at forward, even though it's actually not your strength. And so when you have that awareness and you can see that, it is a lot easier to be aware of, oh, I'm doing that thing that I think is enabling my strength, but actually isn't. And so really looking at some of that balance, I think is very valuable for human-focused leaders. But the only other thing I would say is thank you all for being here and for participating so much. It's lovely to have such an international group with us.
And again, thank you to People G2 for putting on this free webinar for us, allowing us to be here today. And don't forget, you can get your half-off leadership course on remote work, remote leadership, and check out the books. They are there. And there is Céline's contact information as well as mine. If you would like to connect with either of us on LinkedIn, if you're not already, you can reach out to us via email, on the website, whatever you need to do. We're happy to support you. Céline does a lot of work on the coaching side if you need support there. I do a lot of work on the strategy side for companies around remote work and culture. We both are keynote speakers. So if you need any of that, we're happy to help you. Feel free to reach out. And thank you all so much for being here. And it looks like we're going to land right on the dot, 1 hour. It's like we do this for a living.
Yay!
Fantastic. So thank you all for being here. Again, we will send this out to you all. Feel free to share it with everyone in your network, in your companies, whoever needs help. We're happy to have you share it. So thank you.
Thank you.